I have only 5 minutes for questions and answers. After 5 minutes, you can ask your questions to the speakers. So, yes?
Why does God put an independent ego in everyone's heart or consciousness?
Have you ever played hide and go seek? You know that game?
Yes.
It's fun. In other words, God is hidden beneath the independent ego, and then we have the opportunity then to either hold on to the independent ego or let go of it. And so, but in order to have love, in order to taste the love, there has to be the absence of it. And so the appearance of the absence of it. And so when we experience that absence and the pain, the suffering, the yearning, remember he said, I need a heart that has been, or a breast or a chest that has been cleft with yearning in order to understand what I'm saying. In other words, by God's hiding himself, so to speak, behind the veil of our independent egos, we then can experience, and God can experience the re-knowing of himself. Going back to, I was a hidden treasure, and I love to be known, so I created the creation in order to be known. So he creates the creation, in other words, hides himself behind the veil of the independent ego, so that our independent ego, can have the choice to gratefully surrender and recognize God again. But also, a more complete answer is that question, when we say, why does God hide himself behind the veil of the independent ego? It's uncomfortable that God is hidden behind the veil of the independent ego. So the best way to answer that question is to be grateful for the discomfort that you feel when you have that question. And then God will unwrap it for you.
And you said that emotional anger or in the world of killing other people is also come from God?
All of it. Now the thing is, which I didn't get into, the fact that all of this is from God doesn't mean we should say, great, I'm just going to go ahead and mow you down, shoot, kill you, doesn't matter, it's all from God. Rumi has a story about that too. In the garden, there's a guy sees this fruit. In the Middle East, there's always fruit trees that are growing out in the alleyways, and this guy sees some fruit on a branch. It's not his garden, so he jumps over the fence and he climbs up the tree and he starts taking the fruit and eating it. And the owner of the garden comes out and with a big stick and says to the guy, "What are you doing?" He says, "I'm eating God's fruit in God's garden." And the guy with the stick starts hitting him. And the guy eating the fruit says, "What are you doing?" He says, "I'm, holding God's stick, eating God's servant." Okay, now the key point is then, if it's all from God, clearly, there's no question, people are demanded by God in the Quran to do the right thing and to not do bad things. Not just in the Quran, but in all of the religions of the world. We're supposed to do the right thing and not do bad things. How do we juxtapose these two? How do we square these two? Here's the key, and not many people are saying this. The best way that you can discern the right thing to do when it's ambiguous, the best way to discern what is the right thing to do, way you can understand that is what obscures What obscures your awareness of the right thing to do? Your ego. The compulsive habit of egoism and self-worship. I need this, I have to avoid that. Your ego obscures discerning what is the right thing to do. Since your ego obscures objectivity as to what is the right thing to do, the best way to achieve discernment and objective discernment is to surrender your ego. How do you surrender your ego? By being grateful to God for everything, all of your perceptions, all of your feelings, the pain, the horror, or the beauty and the ecstasy.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you for being here. Peace be upon you. How would you characterize what Rumi means by love? Love can be a warm, fuzzy feeling. Is it the character of God, the compassion, mercy? Is it gnosis, this unmediated experience of the divine? What exactly does Rumi mean by love? And that's questions, first of all, for you, Mr. Ansari. And then, if we have time and you're interested, then how would you distinguish, or is there a distinction between love of neighbor and love of God?
Okay, thank you very much for this question. Actually, before I answer the question, we have a Rumi night every week on Thursday. So next week we will talk about love in Masnavi. So it's a very hard question, and the question of love in Masnavi is the hardest question. And Rumi says, Rumi described the love in a very long poem. At the end of the poem, he said, when I came to to describe love, the paper started burning. So,
And the pen broke.
The pen broke, and the paper was destroyed. So he said, I cannot describe love. Yeah, so probably Dr. Professor Walter
there are infinite forms of love. And, from the most earthy to the most sublime. They're all forms of love. Now, if we then ask, what do they have in common? Get into a kind of phenomenology of love. To me, what they all have in common is two aspects: an approach, an embrace, a choice to both approach and embrace on the one hand, and so it has an active and a passive component. To approach and embrace on the one hand, and to surrender and on the other hand. So I think each of the forms of love have an active and passive component. They also have varying degrees of choice. At the apogee of love, the apogee of love is not chemistry. For us, in the West, for there to be love, there has to be chemistry. The apogee of love for Rumi, there is all the chemistry, in existence, all the chemistry you could possibly want is here. If you don't see the chemistry, that's our problem. So the apogee of love is choice. The choice to make this active move toward the beloved. Just like when, in the movies, when you see the two people that haven't seen each other and they're kind of running through the meadow, in slow motion, right? And there's an active component. They're moving together, and they're putting their arms around each other. Now there has to be a kind of passive or surrendering component. Otherwise, they would just go smack, and they'd fall. So there's this active component, and then there's this this surrendering component, surrendering and melting. So there's a movement toward and this active embrace, and also this surrendering and this melting. That's how I would say what all the different forms of love have in common. And at the subtlest point, metaphysically, ontologically, the subtlest aspect of love is God, the infinite, as if, a kind of to talk about this, we can use the human metaphor, which of course falls short, but God, the infinite, moving slightly, apparently, into manifestation, and then surrendering back into infinite manifestation, like two lovers in an embrace who are just completely one, and then separate and look at each other, and then melt once again into union.
Okay. I have two announcements, actually three announcements before concluding. Our speakers are here, for a while, so you can ask your questions. The first one is, as Mr. Ansari mentioned, we are having Rumi night every Thursday at 7:30. We are reading poems by Rumi and then interpretation of the poems, the verses from Rumi. You can find more information from our website, Dallas Islamic Center. The second one is on Friday, 7:30. We are having Quran study. Dr. Joshkun is reading verses from Quran and then giving interpretations of the verses. You can again find the information and the place where it is happening from our website. And the third one is we have refreshments, so we can take.
One request I have, is it possible to put this on YouTube so everybody can benefit from it? I would really request that.
Let's see.
You might have to censor some parts of it.
So let's give a round of applause to our speakers.